What if entropy is a feature and not a bug? So I want to open a lot of threads here. Wikipedia, first of all, defines entropy as a scientific concept as well as a measurable physical property that is most commonly associated with a state of disorder, randomness, or uncertainty. Let's imagine we have a beach, and in this beach we want to build something, but we want to make sure that the things that are built are the best that are built. So therefore, what if we developed an algorithm, and within this beach, so there is the shore, and within this beach we have a lot of sand, and in this sand now, ideally, we would build something that lasts. So we would optimize for an outcome which is sandcastles, for example, that last also over time. So what if now entropy is kind of like the algorithm that is the optimization process, or the solution to this optimization process? If we had, for example, designers or random entities, or we could also call them, just random entities, then these waves would basically do something to the sand. And if we then have these random properties on the sand itself, and they are trying to build something, they are basically trying to revert the entropy into decreasing pockets of entropy, or into pockets where entropy is decreased. So if we think of entropy simplified as the disorder or the state of disorder. So higher entropy would be higher states of disorder or also chaos, and lower entropy would be lower disorder. So if then somebody on this beach organizes things in a way that is maybe a sandcastle, for example, then he or she, or whatever the entity is, creates a pocket of lower entropy. But as then time continues, and as basically all the different pockets of entropy, also maybe basically overall the beach, the entropy again has to increase over time as the chaos basically over time increases. But then, without this algorithm, we basically wouldn't find out who builds the best sandcastles. So with this algorithm now, over time we can figure out who builds the better sandcastles, and therefore we optimize for the designer or for the entity that does the best to whatever materials there are. So if we now think about the sand as all the materials that there are in the universe, basically the resources, and we think of these pockets of lower entropy as a resource allocation that is higher and higher and higher, then we could say that there are certain pockets, such as the sun, such as a solar system, such as a certain galaxy, maybe also, if we assume string theory to a certain extent is true, and we therefore have maybe the possibility of a multiverse or multiple universes, or multiple universes. If we then take all of this and we assume that there are, for some reason, pockets where entropy basically decreases, and within these pockets, and this might be a sun, this might be a human organism, this might also be a sheet of paper, but over time, basically all has to average out into higher states of entropy, where chaos increases over time, then we could now assume that entropy is just bad, or we could just state this. Of course, such an interpretation is always just an interpretation, but disorder already has kind of a negative connotation to it. Chaos has also a negative connotation to it. But if we now go back to this sandcastle example, if we have all of these sandcastles, and there are certain attempts in the universe or also on this beach to basically create something out of the raw materials that might be Higgs bosons, that might be atoms, that might be photons, but whoever basically creates the best thing that is the most stable over time and is able to, as the waves go by and go by and go by and wash over the sand, is able to withstand whatever this algorithm that is entropy is, that is then reallocating the resources, then whoever is able to withstand this is basically the outcome this algorithm, we could call entropy, would optimize for. So without the constraint, without the artificial, let's call it artificial constraint of entropy, it could be that the sandcastles never would be built. Of course, a sandcastle is always something that is built on sand, literally. But maybe a little bit in the back end of the beach, somebody once then builds a beach house, for example, or the Empire State Building. And these, as we see in fantasy movies, for example, of course, these also break down over time, but they break down less over a given time. So the rate of destruction over a certain period of time is then ideally lower. And we could now take an even bigger perspective. So in the beginning we have lots of particles, and these particles are the raw materials of one universe, maybe also multiple universes. And then as we have these here, there are again certain pockets. Maybe by chance, some of these particles are together, and then gravitation, for example, kicks in, and something starts to collect more and more gravitational things that are around it. Because matter has some gravitation, and because there is a gravitational force in between two objects, then they start to contract, basically. They don't start to contract, but they start to attract other matter that is around this thing. This could then maybe result in a sun, and so on and so forth. So first, one could describe the first stage as the lifeless stage. Let's just call it lifeless, or let's just call it a low. It is already kind of a lower entropy state, but in terms of how low it is, we could say that entropy, or disorder, as defined by us as humans, basically decreases as the artificial structure goes up. So basically, as these pockets in the universe build themselves out over time and are able to resist more and more against the waves of entropy that wash against the shore, we reach higher and higher levels of entropy. So if this is time here, let's just call it T for time, and this here is the rate of entropy. It's not the rate of entropy, it is just entropy. So the problem now we have with this graph is, ideally it would look like this. We have different levels and they go up over time. So we had a level here, and we have a level here, and then a level here, and then a level here. So as we construct things basically in this universe, and as these pockets then have lower entropy, that's the problem now with this graph, basically we have to turn it around. So time would be here, but we don't have to turn it really around, so we just begin with higher states of entropy. The highest state of entropy is basically the normal. And as then there is something that organizes itself, let's call it a sun, let's call it a planet, then we have a state of entropy that is like this. Then we have maybe the next thing, which might be a planet. And on this planet we already now have some things. Or in the beginning we have photons, and so photons would be light, but we also would have protons, neutrons, electrons, and so on and so forth. And they collect each other, or they collect each other, or they attract each other in some way or another. Then we have different forces, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and so on and so forth. So then we already are lower in entropy. Then maybe on one planet, for example, there is life. So there are the first organisms, there are the first cells, and then we have even lower states of entropy. So there is an organism that is kind of organized by DNA. We could also see DNA again as kind of a response to the shore, a response to the waves that constantly hit up the shore. So basically, the DNA in this case would be kind of a plan that is developed. So every time we build something, we don't build it from scratch. We don't build a sandcastle out from imagination, but we build it from a plan, and this plan then also evolves. And the plan that is the best wins then over time, and therefore the plan evolves. So we then have maybe single-cell organisms. And then these single-cell organisms figure out that they can kind of bind together in some way or another, that they can make something bigger, and then we have multi-single-cell organisms, or small things that basically exist out of multiple of these small organisms. And then along this line there might be something that is then a very simple animal. And then if we go along and along and along, then we would maybe have some of these organisms, some of these single cell organisms, then even bigger organisms. So as the information density in these pockets basically increases, the entropy goes down. So basically the structure that withstands or is able to withstand entropy, the creative constraint or the creative design constraint, one could say, the entropy goes down and goes down and goes down. So what if then there is a human, for example? What would be the next thing that organizes then humans together and maybe makes them more stable over time? and prevents them from decaying, prevents them, the sandcastles, or the higher things that result out of these sandcastles, prevents the decay of these sandcastles by the waves that hit the shore again and again and again. That is entropy.